I remember the day I decided I was going to be switching from the Xbox to the PlayStation. I'd always been an Xbox kid. Hell, growing up, I had two of them. I lived in a split household, half the week at my mom's, the other half at my dad's, and that's just the way it always was. My mom got me an Xbox for my birthday when I was, however, old enough to receive that sort of gift. I'm thinking between 4th and 5th grade because Halo Reach was relatively new then, and that was one of the first Xbox games that I owned. I remember playing on Xbox all the way up until I was in 8th grade, most of the time thinking I would move on to the Xbox 720 when the time came, but just like my hopes of the next installment of the console series being called the 720 being dashed away upon the announcement of the Xbox One, so were my thoughts on upgrading to said console the day I found out that the PlayStation 4 was going to receive Final Fantasy XIV exclusively. I had to have it. And I did. I purchased a PlayStation 4 with my own money I saved up from working at a family member's kettle corn booth at my local farmer's market. Final Fantasy XIV was something I had been anticipating playing for months at this point, but for some reason I just never got around to playing it. I still thought about it whenever I was looking for a new game, but for some reason it was never the next thing that I wanted to play. And over time, it went more and more to the back of my mind. I even dipped my toes into Elder Scrolls Online pretty thoroughly when it first came out, but I never got around to that one MMO I always thought about in passing. I played Final Fantasy 15 in this time as well and even beat it 3 times over. I played the first 3 games in the series and beat them all. I got a PS5 for similar reasons that I got the previous installment, just because I knew Final Fantasy 16 would be an exclusive, and I still never mustered up the courage to take on what had become one of the most played MMOs in the world by that time. Until now. January 18th, 2025, I hit the checkout button on Final Fantasy XIV and all of its expansions. I have chronically terrible internet, even with Wi-Fi extenders in my current living situation. I have no means of using a hard connection, so I unfortunately had to wait until the afternoon of the next day. Everything I've said in this video up until this point has been pre-gameplay. I began writing the script in part to offlet some of the excitement while the game was downloading. During this time, I also pondered what I knew about the game. I couldn't help but play through a little Final Fantasy XVI while I waited in anticipation. I knew that the last 2 installments of the series had been action, Devil May Cry-esque games, but I didn't really know what to expect from the combat or questing in Final Fantasy XIV. I knew nothing of the story, even having watched a few videos on the game on YouTube months ago in passing. For some reason, none of the things that were shown to me about the game ever really stuck in my mind other than what the characters looked like, some of the lore behind the game and how it got to where it is now, and some of the raid boss battles and kind of how they looked as well. I struggled with my internet for some time in the morning before the game was actually downloaded at a reasonable speed, but at last, mid-afternoon on a brisk winter weekend, it was finally time. It was finally time for me to play Final Fantasy XIV for the first time. After I completed the Square Enix account creation that slowed my roll ever so slightly, I was greeted by an epic account of the history of the beginning of the game. If you're looking for some introspective lore dump on how the history unfolded, you've unfortunately come to the wrong place, as something like that is better left to a creator that has a bit more personal knowledge on the subject. Judging from just the opening sequence of the game alone, I can tell that Final Fantasy XIV is no dark fantasy. Yes, the Great Calamity may have nearly destroyed all of existence, but the game lets you know that no matter what happens, life and light will always find a way. Most Final Fantasy games in this series that I have played, I feel have been quite dark. The games that I have played include 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 13, 15, and 16. All of these games have a darker atmosphere to the characters, setting, and story, except in my opinion to 1 and 3. They seem to have a more upbeat, hopeful atmosphere, akin to what 14 is going for. Now, I could be wrong. I'm only giving my account of how the game feels to me as an individual with individual gaming experiences. I'm also only giving my account of how the first few hours of the game made me feel. Maybe the story and the atmosphere changed drastically from place to place, world to world, DLC to DLC, but That's not what I'm getting at here. Final Fantasy XIV is very in tune with the spirit of the series, from what I can tell. From the titles that I have played, hope seems to be the key thing that ties Final Fantasy games together in my book. Whether the title I'm playing is a dark fantasy, Game of Thrones esque story like 16 or an exciting, wondrous adventure with friends like 3, the one thing I always feel from a Final Fantasy game is hope for a better future. The feeling of hope is a bit different in Final Fantasy XIV, where in other games you start off in a broken world. I feel like I'm more so in a world that had already been broken and put back together again. Usually there is some sort of greater evil, whether it is obvious who it is, like Niflheim in 15, or a less obvious behind the scenes villain like the Cloud of Darkness in Final Fantasy III. You can, for the most part, see a clear path towards bettering the world that you're in. But for the first time in a Final Fantasy game, I feel like the only thing that I'm trying to make better is myself. In the few hours of the game that I have played so far, I don't think I've ever felt lost or like I don't know what to do in the game. The game does a great job of explaining its systems and mechanics on how to traverse the world and navigate its menus. Granted, I am playing on controllers, so the menus possibly feel a bit more janky than I'd like them to, but I understand that the game is optimized for mouse and keyboard, as MMOs are typically desktop games. There are guilds in the game that seem to serve the sole purpose of teaching players about their individual classes. There's senior player characters in the game whose responsibility is to help new players in case they get stuck or lost. And there are even NPC characters in the game who will straight up call you out, telling you that they know adventurers will do any job as long as it gets them some sort of reward, and they're right. I will always jump at the prospect of collecting 10 bear cheeks or pick up random debris around a stage that wasn't there until I accepted the quest, because leveling up and collecting gear in Final Fantasy XIV is really fun and interesting. I found myself stuffing quests in my quest log left and right for hopes of new gear to replace the starter rags and experience in combat to get more skills to increase my usefulness in battle. The quests themselves are a bit fetch quest esque, but like I said earlier, the promise of any reward was enough for me to gladly throw stones at squirrels for a few minutes to cull the population in order to get even a smidge closer to some sweet new action skill I can bust out on the level 3 ladybugs. Quests are typically short and they never seem to take more than a few minutes to complete, and they're always more than worth the time spent. Final Fantasy XIV showed me the true spirit of an MMO in the 2 hours that I played it. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't have much experience playing MMOs. I played Elder Scrolls Online a good amount of hours and I didn't love it. Something was missing. It was a fun game, don't get me wrong. Still, it wasn't what I typically wanted to get from an MMO experience. I felt too much of a need to get to a higher level in the game just so that I could participate in the war faction aspects of the game, to gain some renown in the community. The pressure was especially real because my best friend had stayed home from school quite a bit to play the game and even reached the top spot on the server we played for a few days, which was something that I just couldn't do myself. Eventually, I turned the game off and never turned it back on, never having even come close to creating a max level character. I tried playing World of Warcraft for a time on a free trial. I believe you can take a character up to level 20 before you have to pay for a subscription. WoW was interesting to me. I'd heard a lot about WoW. I even played Hearthstone for a while as a teenager, which I did enjoy thoroughly, but for some reason, when I booted what I remember being some sort of goblin hunter up for my trial of the game, I felt like I was just getting to a party that had already reached its climax a while ago, and the partygoers were getting weary and ready to leave themselves. Final Fantasy XIV, being the 10-plus-year-old game that it is, genuinely surprised me with how fresh everything felt. I don't love the character designs or the way the class system works just yet. The designs are a bit too anime for me, and that's honestly saying something because I am a massive weeb and the classes just seem a bit restrictive, at least up to what I've played. I understand that you can upgrade jobs or something like that later on, but for the entire healer line to have to start off as a conjurer seems a bit lame to me due to the other classes having at least 3 different options to start out with. And maybe that's my fault for picking healer in the first place, but What can I say? I love me some support in an RPG. What I'm trying to get at is, despite these features being an inconvenience to me in a minor way right off the bat, the game still manages to impress me with a strong MMO spirit and strategically interesting gameplay. Maybe I am too late for World of Warcraft, but that's okay, because Final Fantasy XIV welcomed me with open arms to characters and concepts I was already rather familiar with, whether it was through personal experience and nostalgia or through popular culture teaching me how an MMO should look. I'm excited to set off on what would be my very own Final Fantasy XIV story. Until now, Final Fantasy XIV had been just out of reach for as long as I could remember. Things like financial, mental, and stable internet constraints constantly held me back from finally setting out on a fantasy MMO adventure of my own. But now I'm a grown man of 25, and I think it's high time I start doing things in my life that I've always wanted. There's many things I want to achieve in life, like there's many experiences I want to have, Final Fantasy XIV being one of them. This even relates to the point of this video in the first place. I love talking about video games. I can talk about video games all day and night without stopping. It's truly my favorite special interest, and to be able to create a platform where I can find other people on the internet to talk about video games with is a dream that I've wanted to make a reality for a long time, and I'm finally ready to make that happen. If you enjoyed this video and you have any tips or personal opinions about Final Fantasy XIV and your experiences with the game, please leave them down in the comments section below. If you want to receive updates on how I'm doing in the game as I go along, I'd also be willing to make some sequel videos on that sort of thing in the future as well. And last but not least, leave some suggestions for other games you'd like to see me talk about or try for future videos on this channel. I'd like to thank you all for watching. All that I ask is that if you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe down below. I'm just starting out, so I'm not too sure how often I'll be posting, but once I figure out how to properly fit the YouTube workflow into my regular schedule, I will announce what the regular posting schedule will be. One last time, thank you for watching and have a great day.